Hi, Thomas here. Welcome to DreamSpeak. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to take a minute to thank our listeners in Seattle, Sequim, Los Angeles, Honolulu, Singapore, Tagbilaran City, Philippines, and Dublin, Ireland. Don't forget, dreamers, if you'd like to be a guest on the show and receive a free dream interpretation session, email contact@dreamspeak.us and say hello.
Hi, dreamers. Thank you for learning with us today on DreamSpeak. I'm Rica.
And I'm Thomas.
And this is the podcast about dreams that teaches you a complete system to help you listen to your dreams and get the guidance they're providing you every day.
How would you like private lessons in loving yourself? Well, that's what Micheal Callahan offers. He's a person with a special talent for self-love. Rica and I became friends with Micheal when he joined the original in-person DreamSpeak group that we used to lead. As you will see, a healthy love for oneself can lead to a rich dream life. So, our guest today is our dear friend, Micheal Callahan. And Micheal, one of the things that you offer people is professional coaching service. Can you describe a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yes, I'm a health and life coach that also has training in fitness training. My clients are over the age of 50. They don't have to be, but this just turns out that way. And I am, on Halloween, going to turn 73. So during the pandemic, I came across this advertisement for health and life coach, or just health coach. I took the course, got certified, and, ironically, during the shutdown, I actually lost about 20 pounds, started eating even healthier because it didn't make sense to eat out. Everything was takeout, and that didn't seem good to me. So I just started cooking my own food.
Most people did the opposite during COVID.
Yeah.
They gained 20 pounds.
Yeah.
They lost 20 pounds.
But I got more active. I've had a lifelong interest in health, and it's just been taking one step after another. And so I think, my doctor told me a few years ago that I was her healthiest patient over the age of 60.
What are a few health ideas that you like all of your clients to know?
My one goal is to help people love themselves more. Because if you love yourself more, you feed yourself like you love yourself. You give yourself credit for hanging in there. You pat yourself on the back often. Just like I imagine if you were responsible for a child or trying to really help somebody that needed your help, that you loved, you would do everything you could. And if you'll do that for yourself, you're going to be okay. In my experience, I've found a lot of people that just don't like themselves very much. They've been criticized a lot. It's really hard because I know I came from a very critical family, and I haven't always been as I am now. It took decades to cultivate, and cultivate's one of my favorite words because it means growing something that's, not there exactly. And so I've cultivated optimism and just being happy. But the other thing is something I heard on your podcast that I carry with me, the 4 pillars of well-being: activity, sleep, nutrition, and mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. If you take care of those, if you get a good night's sleep, and whenever I say sleep, it's just not sleep, it's good quality sleep. And one of the things I train people to do is to prepare themselves for sleep, to cleanse their mind and help themselves fall asleep. I had a stepmother with Alzheimer's, and she was just naturally a lot of anxiety. But I trained her, I helped her, that is, over a period of time to where that she was able to clear her mind. She had all these questions at bedtime. I just help her to say, no, we don't want to think about that. We can talk about that tomorrow. Right now, The only thing that matters is sleep. And I teach her to pay attention to her breath. And I told her later on, I said, you know what? If they had a sleeping competition in the Olympics, I'm pretty sure you would get a silver at least, but maybe gold. And she would laugh at that. But it was true. She slept so sound at night for about 8 years after her diagnosis. The sleep helped her mind so much. You see, if you give your body what it needs, it's incredibly able to function. If you give it that sleep, if you feed it healthy, and if you develop a good mindset and don't get discouraged and be optimistic, if you stay active, you're going to be okay.
That's a great sharing about your philosophy and your approach to doing this coaching. And I think it really highlights one of the things that has made the three of us such good friends. You know, you're a very unconditionally loving person, and it can form the root basis for amazing change in people's lives. We really admire and respect that quality about you. So that may be like the essence of what's special about your coaching.
Yeah, it's a passion of mine. And right now, I am also going to a school on functional nutrition, and I'm learning a great deal how this body works as a system. You know, so much of healthcare right now is treating individual parts. I mean, you have maybe some sort of cardiovascular problem, so you're seeing a cardiologist, or if it's your feet, your podiatrist. But what I'm learning is this body is a whole system, along with your mind, and everything's connected. Let me give you an example. Cholesterol is something that a lot of doctors are concerned about, and they'll send you a cardiologist for that. But the liver plays a big role in regulating cholesterol. So if you're ignoring the liver, you're not really approaching it in the full way that it should be.
It sounds like you're learning a lot. I think we could turn our attention to our curiosity about how you became such a spiritually centered person in the first place. And do you want to just spend a little time talking us through your spiritual biography?
Sure. I think it's been all my life. I think empathy was strong with me. So when someone was hurting, I wanted to help them. And that's something that goes way back. I can remember in elementary school being on a field trip where we had to go through this gully. And the people that got through the gully quickest was offering a hand to help the others up. Well, I was offering my hand and nobody was taking my hand. And I felt sad, felt like nobody wanted my help. All my life, you know, it's been my goal to try to help other people. And I think that I've always felt this oneness with everyone. You know, I didn't, have it as a mature thought, but it was just an instinct of mine. And so many times along the way, I didn't quite know how, and sometimes it was detrimental to me. But I finally found my way to where that I truly do help people. Yeah. And so I think probably one of the biggest revolutions on my spiritual journey was really learning to love myself. In fact, love myself in such a way that I love myself more than anybody else ever could. You know, I came from a family that was very critical. They were quick to, if you made a mistake, why, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? And, it caused me to hold back from taking a leap and of faith and doing things. And see, I remember an influential friend, a friend that was from a very affluent family, telling me that his father, every Sunday, they made a decision they would all eat dinner together. And at that dinner, the father would say, what mistakes did y'all make this week? Because they got points for making mistakes. He wanted, the fact that they were making mistakes told him they were trying things. They were taking chances.
Wow.
And see, I thought, wow, man, I wish I had that environment growing up.
Sounds
But I had an environment that sort of discouraged taking chances. But that inspired me. And so I had this sort of epiphany that all this time, my life that I'd spent criticizing myself hadn't done me one bit of good. And I made a decision at that point, and this has been about 15 years ago, that from that point on, I would endeavor to focus on what I like about myself and let go of everything else. And, it didn't always, wasn't always linear. Sometimes, there'd be a couple of steps back, but just I was persistent at it. And so at this point, I've come to a point in my life where I totally admire myself. Somebody could cuss me out and call me all kinds of names, and it wouldn't register. I've been tested on that.
That might have been about when we met you or shortly after that. Because
Sometime.
I think,
Yeah.
we've known you for at least maybe, 14 years or something.
Yeah.
Gosh, has it really been that long?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, it was a very interesting time in my life when I met y'all. But that's probably been the biggest spiritual change in my life, is learning to love myself. And so part of my journey now is trying to help other people to love themselves more. That's part of my coaching philosophy. And see, when you learn to love yourself, your life changes. That's really, I think, for quite a few people, the hardest thing to do is learning to love themselves.
I know that's a challenge for me, for sure. I think it is probably for a lot of people.
Yes.
Why don't you say a little bit more about why it was an interesting time in your life around when we met?
Oh, well, the time I met you through DreamSpeak. You were having at your house. We had a mutual friend that said, well, I'm going to DreamSpeak tonight. And I thought, At that time, I'd had some very interesting experience, some interesting dreams, but I was working at a very large electronic retail store. And I was working in the service department at that time. So I had an elderly Asian couple bring back a laptop. And when somebody returned a computer, I was responsible for erasing the hard drive and reinstalling the operating system. And usually I started the process while they were still there, because I wanted to make sure the password and everything would work. So this couple are there, and turns out they were Chinese, and the men spoke broken English. And anyway, they were telling me that they just changed their mind. So anyway, the wife said something. She said, well, how about all of our financial data that's on there? And I said, oh, that's okay. I'm going to erase all of that. I'll erase the entire hard drive and reinstall the operating system. And the man said, do you speak Chinese? I said, no. And he says, well, my wife asked me about that, and you understood her. And I said, well, yeah, she spoke pretty clear English to me. He says, she doesn't speak English. She was speaking Chinese. And you understood her? He looked puzzled. Huh? I didn't know what to think. Yeah, I mean, after I got through with him, I told my supervisor, and he just shrugged his shoulder. It didn't seem like a big deal, but it really got me. So whenever I got to DreamSpeak, I talked about that. I'd had some other dreams about me being Asian at one point, and I didn't know whether it was past life memories or whether it was just random dreams. So, I found y'all to be very, very wise when it came to dreams. And of course, I bonded with y'all real quick. I found y'all to be very loving, compassionate people. And I felt like you were my people. And right now, I feel like you're family. And that's why I traveled all the way from Dallas, and you're my first stop on a long vacation.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we feel very much the same way. And it's funny because my side of you coming to DreamSpeak, what always sticks with me is that I feel like you were one of the best participants we ever had. And the reason why I feel that way is because you picked up on how to unlock the meaning of your dreams really fast.
Oh, yeah, you just got it.
Mm-hmm.
And you had fascinating material to work with because your dreams were so interesting.
Yeah.
So deep.
And over the years, I've learned so much about, you know, recording these dreams and journaling them. And I think I remember my dreams better now than I ever have in my life. I mean, it's only gotten better.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm so glad we could help you start on that journey. And your, sleep practices and what you encourage people to learn how to do with your coaching is not only very supportive for their health, but also for their mental health in the sense of being in a much better relationship with their dreams when they're sleeping. That's just a great thing to do.
True.
All around.
See, in the dream sleep, you're literally processing your memories and stuff. And if you don't get enough REM sleep, you're going to have trouble with memory. You're going to probably have some emotional problems. And if it becomes a chronic thing, it's going to possibly lead to some form of dementia.
I have recently learned something very similar, and it seems like what you said ties to research where they're finding that part of what's going on, they don't know all of it, obviously, but part of what's going on is the plaques that build up in your brain, which are just a normal byproduct of brain activity, I guess. They actually can get washed away and cleansed while we are sleeping. And that's part of why they theorize that people who sleep really poorly or not enough can wind up at a higher risk of dementia.
That's true. In fact, when you're in deep sleep, there's literally fluids coming up through the spinal column to the brain and cleansing and detoxifying the brain. You see, the brain, I think I read where it is 2% of your body weight, but it uses 25% of your body's energy. So it builds up a lot of toxins. And so in deep sleep, you're literally cleansing that brain.
That's amazing. Another interesting piece of dream research that I read recently, which was new information to me, is scientists now feel convinced that we can dream in all phases of sleep.
Yeah, I read that recently too, that it's not just during REM, which is what we have always heard. So,
But I do find it interesting because we know from direct experience and helping people with their dream life that there's very different categories and types of dreams, which we covered in the 4th episode of this podcast. And I think that likely, although I have no evidence of this, but likely the message dreams that respond to interpretation symbolically, the symbolic dreams, those are probably more commonly going to happen in REM sleep. And then other types of dreams might be more associated with deep sleep, things like healing dreams. I have no idea where practice dreams would come in. I mean, these are all just guesses. Could be REM, could be light sleep. I don't know. But one thing we do know also, now that I'm thinking through this out loud, is often the dream message that your soul really wants you to get from the night is one that you remember right before waking up. And so that would be as your sleep is getting lighter because you're moving towards wakefulness.
also, as the night goes on, usually your periods of REM get longer and longer. So I think we have, for me, it seems like I'm in REM a lot of times when I'll check my Fitbit, and when I wake up and remember a dream, I've been in REM.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do have a very strong intuition that as we sleep, it's almost like a symphony, and our dreaming, the soul activity that we do at night complexifies, if that's a word. It's like this.
I don't know if that's a word.
I don't know if it is either. These longer periods of REM are probably evidence that our dreaming is sort of mounting in its intensity and complexity the longer we're asleep until it's time to get up. Anyway, just a bunch of speculation, but kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see how research evolves in this field over time. But Michael, I think we've done a good job of contextualizing why your dream practice has become important to you. And you brought a dream with you to share with us, right?
I did. It was actually just last night. I had this dream where a gun that I owned, and, I don't own any guns. I don't have an interest in guns. But in this dream, I had a gun that I'd given to somebody. And in this dream, this person had committed a crime with the gun. But the gun still had they was talking about, well, Thomas, you and Rica was in this dream. And I remember Thomas saying, you need to get your fingerprints off this gun. And so I remember saying, Well, just put it in your dishwasher and run it through the cycle and then throw it in the river. And that was pretty much the dream. But, in my logical mind, I'm thinking, what better way to get fingerprints off of anything is to put it through your dishwasher.
That's awesome. Wow.
And I find that a lot of my dreams, I'm sitting there thinking in the dream, trying to be logical.
That is interesting. Logic rarely enters into it for me, but when I'm having a practice dream, I notice sometimes I'm thinking through problems logically. But anyway, this is great because this is another example we're going to have of just how much meaning there can be in a dream that's brief or seems to be brief and just a few images in the dream. So the way that we normally start breaking down a symbolic dream is by just separating out who were the aspects in the dream and what symbols are important. So let's just start with symbols. Firearm is an important symbol in this dream. What else?
Dishwasher?
A dishwasher.
The river?
And a river. Yeah, and isn't that about it? And a crime. And as far as people in the dream, it was you and me, and Rica might have been in there somewhere, but she was
but she wasn't prominent.
Yeah, okay, all right.
But the person I gave the gun to wasn't in the dream.
Oh, interesting. And they were the one that committed the crime, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of a mystery figure. We're not sure who they are.
You don't know who it was.
Correct.
Okay.
You don't even have a feeling. It wasn't like you recognized the energy.
I just felt it was a guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
cool. So you think it was male?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So as we have mentioned many times on the show, there's something that we call the opposite gender rule. And so when the gender of an aspect in a dream matches your gender, then that means it's a part of your consciousness. And the way that we ordinarily describe consciousness is a pretty practical definition. It's the part of our mind that we use to kind of operate in our waking life. It is the logical part of our mind. It's the part of our mind that contains the things that we're really keenly aware of. Maybe there's some things around the periphery, but things like the objects around you in a room, the people that are on your mind that day, things like that. These are all in your conscious mind. But very important sources of motivation and impulse and, things that really drive us, including sources of willpower, are actually in our subconscious mind. And it's just a fascinating way that the mind has these levels because we also are much less aware of our subconscious mind. And I think that, the insight that we get from Eastern philosophies is to expand your consciousness, they always used to say. And the more you do, the more you know yourself, the more you can potentially respect yourself, the more you can control yourself and, lean away from your base impulses towards impulses that would help you to live a happier life. And those things have a lot to do with shining more of a light into your subconscious. So this particular dream, though, the crime was committed by a part of your conscious mind. So something that you're employing your willpower with, something that you are kind of, this is something that I'm focused on. It violated universal law. That's the universal meaning of crime, is that, there are laws that govern the way that our universe works, like love is a universal law. And somehow, some way, just here recently, just in the last few days, you did something that you felt was against your own ethics, values, whatever. In some way, it violated universal law. And this is one of the things I really like about you, Michael, because we're going to be able to get to the bottom of this.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, intuiting what that is can be a little bit more of a challenge, but I know you're going to be able to do it. And it intrigues me the way things like this work in a dream, because it may be a very small thing. It may have been a momentary decision. It may be something that a grand scale of your life, the grand scheme of your life, really doesn't have much consequence. But I know you, and you hold yourself to a higher standard. And so I don't know what we're going to find, but something happened.
Yeah, who knows?
I'm curious.
So where should we go next, do you think? Because we'll unlock all the pieces puzzle eventually. It doesn't really matter which approach we take.
Well, I just want to ask Michael if you've had any thoughts about the dream,
No, I
Or you
didn't give
haven't-
it too much thought because I wanted to just have a fresh mind,
Yeah.
not have any preconceived ideas.
What do you want to look at next, Rica?
Well, a gun also is a tool for change, right? So using a gun means that you want to change something now,
Or it did, actually.
or you change something. And so do you know what crime was committed with the gun?
No,
No.
it was sort of generic or general.
Do you think, you might have an intuition about this, do you think that the guy who did the crime violently hurt someone with the gun?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, I think that possibly killed somebody.
okay,
That
okay,
was my
good.
feeling.
Really good insight. So another thing about the philosophy of dreaming that we've realized over the years is that our the characters in our dreams, what we call the aspects, the multiplicity of aspects within our dream world shows us just how multifaceted and multidimensional we are as souls, as beings. And so we have all of these parts of us. And the thing is, depending on the life that we're living, basically, some parts of us are much more prominent and important to our lives than others. Some are just very minor characters, to speak
Mm.
metaphor. Now, we can't just say for sure that the aspect of you that died, meaning that aspect changed, was a minor part of you. But there is a bit of evidence there, which is that you have no recollection of who the criminal was, first of all, which means, you may be trying to bring something to mind and you're just starting to shed light on it, but you have absolutely no idea which aspect of you was killed. And just sitting here with you, I don't intuit that that's an issue around ignorance. I have this feeling that that aspect maybe is not that big of a deal in your life. So you've changed some aspect of yourself, but this may be more of a minor kind of upkeep dream. Like I said, I know you. You hold yourself to a high standard and you scrutinize your behavior at the end of the day. And this is probably going to be a dream that's just giving you a pointer about something. That's my guess.
Yeah, so you had 2 days by yourself driving up from Dallas, and you did a lot of sightseeing and you went to places, but you had a lot of time with your thoughts. And so, was there anything that may have come up for you that stood out in your mind that you were thinking about, or that you changed or made a decision to do something different?
Yeah. So while we've been sitting here and talking, just a vision came to my mind of the person that I gave the gun to possibly being a heavy-set male. And one of the things that occurs to me is since the transition of my mother, stepmother that is, on July 14th, I have been on a trajectory of losing weight. In fact, I've lost 10 or 12 pounds in those 2.5 months. And, I think I've reinforced even eating healthier. And I think that without having to care for somebody else, I'm able to really focus more on myself. So I'm thinking the bigger guy that I was, I'm just thinking out loud, could have been the part that died.
So you think the bigger guy may have died, not the bigger guy was the criminal?
That's a good thought. No, the big guy was a criminal. Yeah, okay.
The big guy may have been the criminal?
Yeah, I think he was the criminal,
Okay.
not me.
Okay. So we're definitely getting somewhere now. One thing that may help us is to bring me in here, because the way this works, and it's no holds barred here, we have worked with dreams for years. We understand it's not personal. So the way to work with aspects that we found the easiest and most convenient is just try to sit for a minute in quiet and think, what are adjectives that come to mind to describe me, right? So these are associations you have about me. Again, it's not personal. It's not because I am that way. It's just things that you think about me. But that may help you color in this other aspect in the dream, and that's going to be helpful because I was helping you hide evidence. So that's going to be important.
Well,
Yeah.
I've known you to be calm. I don't believe I've ever seen you agitated. I know you to be gentle and kind, but also really, really wise. And really, I know you've studied so many ways of being. You've traveled internationally and seen other ways of being. You've studied spirituality a lot. So those are the things I know about you, and you're just somebody that I love very much. So does that help?
Yeah, sure. So then this would be an aspect of your consciousness also, because my gender also matches yours. And it's a part of you that you love. And it's a part of you that's kind, it's gentle, and it's wise. Those all seem like really good things. And I'm wondering if we might be missing something because I told him to hide the fingerprints. That was my main job in this dream, giving him a way to think like, how am I going to conceal that this crime was done with my gun? He didn't do the crime. The dreamer, being Michael, did not do the crime, but he accidentally facilitated and then decided to cover up a crime with his tool for change. Which is why, by the way, just as a sidebar, that's why it makes sense that in a dream you could have a gun, because we all have the potential to change things. It's just a very easy go-to symbol for, the ability to change something. So obviously neither of us owns a gun in waking life, but, we can still have one in a dream.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think about that, babe? What are we missing here? How come I told him to do something wrong? I mean, concealing evidence, I think, is pretty unequivocally not going to be a positive symbol in this dream.
No, I'm a little stumped.
Me too, but we're going to figure it out. I know we will.
Mm-hmm.
With your intuition and our experience, we'll figure it out. And we could talk about dishwashers. Maybe that'll help us bring in another piece. So essentially washing things is purifying them on a spiritual level, whether it's taking a shower, that's like purifying yourself, sort of.
And dishes are what we eat off of, and that is about food, which stands in for knowledge.
Right.
Knowledge. So you're cleansing these, the dishes, which would hold knowledge.
I think we should bring this in here. It's fascinating how the language of symbolic dreams works because everything has meaning. Every single little thing. When you bring new things in, if they're related to the dream, even indirectly, they do pertain to its meaning. And so you are a person I know who does an amazing job assimilating new knowledge. You're both very discriminating about seeking out the kind of knowledge that would be beneficial for you. You can consume a large amount of knowledge, and you can make sense out of new knowledge within your own philosophy of living. And so the consumption of food in this dream, I'm sure, is pertinent, even though you didn't eat anything. What it tells me, the dishwasher, is like you have a respect for the process of gathering knowledge in life, and that you also have a system by which you mentally know how to keep repeating that cycle. So you're always able to be receptive to new knowledge and be discriminating about what's good for me, what should I focus on, etc. So you're always gaining new knowledge and you're very well equipped to do that. And that's why you got a dishwasher, which is actually like an inner process is what that represents. So you're thinking with my help as a co-conspirator that putting a firearm in this important, tool that you have, a dishwasher that keeps your kind of pipeline of philosophical knowledge flowing in life, is going to be a way to cover this up. And that is just really intriguing because you're using something that is definitely a force for good in your life that would be almost related to your meditation practices because you're a very contemplative person. And that's how we assimilate our knowledge, right? We have to find a way to take what's beneficial for us and integrate it into our life. You're really good about that. So a dishwasher would almost be tied to that kind of spiritual activity. And then you're putting something really very impure, evidence of a crime, right into that and sort of exploiting this good habit that you've created for yourself to cover something up so that it can just be thrown in the river, discarded, and let's just pretend that never happened.
Forget it.
Yeah. But you know that it did happen. And that's why you had this dream. Because even if this turns out to be a very small thing, which I'm guessing it will, you wanted to call your attention to it. This is something you wanted to make a mental note. I did this. And now what the heck did Michael do?
Wow.
And Rica, I think, was also really on a good track, which is it can literally be just thoughts that we have when we're alone, right? If our thoughts start to go off track onto a path that is really not good for us, that can be enough right there because thought is cause. The way that we use our willpower and our mental energy can greatly influence the decisions that we make in our waking life. So even just on that road trip, you may have had some patterns in your mind that you just weren't happy with, or something that you did that you wished you could kind of just put out of your mind but you couldn't. And we now know that it also had a relationship to an aspect of you, just an aspect of you, that was heavy set. And you know that weight loss is important to you. You're succeeding with weight loss, which is not easy, right? And we all know, science tells us that every decade that most people age, it's more difficult to lose weight. So it's a great accomplishment that you have found means, like I said, you're so good at assimilating new knowledge, to put together a plan that actually works for you. And here's this aspect of your consciousness that was not successful with that. It's kind of the pre-weight loss Michael, sort of.
Yeah.
You know, and he did something wrong, and I don't know what it is yet. But your intuition's going to be the most helpful thing here.
Well, maybe it has to do with something from the past. If it was pre-weight loss, Michael.
It can't. It can't, because we know from the philosophy of dreaming that that's not how message dreams work. Now, it could be that something from the past, which was a bit of a pattern that you've overcome, could be rearing its head again. And that may be part of why you wanted to put it out right away. You're like, no, you know, I'm not going to have those thoughts again. Could be something like that, but it has to be contemporary. And symbolic dreams almost always deal directly with life events from the last 48 hours.
So, Michael.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is I've had a long history of self-doubt. And, you know, I've really come a long ways. And sometimes there's a fear, like I've had a pattern of going into something with enthusiasm and then letting it fizzle out and not doing anything. And I think sometimes I have a fear of just letting the enthusiasm fizzle out, you know, that I'm feeling something strong, but will I carry through? So it's self-doubt.
So have you had that on this trip or when
Um,
you were driving by yourself?
I think I have it every day. You know, probably the one thing about this trip, just before I left, there was just a lot of things going on that
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
scrambled my brain.
Mhm.
You know, things that involve my transportation and stuff. But, you know, it took me a little bit to get relaxed and into the trip. And, you know, actually, whenever I got a couple of 100 miles away from home, you know, my whole terrain and everything had changed. And I started just focusing on where I was and in the moment.
I think you're really on to something now. I think we're getting very close to the core message for you here. I have a feeling that what you just described at the last was really pertinent, which is that the material difficulties, the sources of stress that you were just experiencing before you took this trip, which has been a long time coming. You've been the primary caregiver for your stepmother for years and just doing a lot. And, you know, you finally have just recently gotten to a space where you're free to do this traveling. And so those things, you know, scrambling your brain, as you said, I could see how it could very possibly have been a space within your brain under stress where you could also have those doubts arising. But as you said, as you got present, which you're very good at being present on this trip, then maybe those things settled. My theory here is the whole reason you had this dream is because you, being you want to contextualize what happened when you were under a little bit more stress and how it actually, like, you want to point out to yourself, yes, this did cause your self-doubt tendency to rear its head again. And the way you responded to it was essentially just destroying it, right? You just crushed that right away. For me, going on a trip is always an opportunity to look at things differently and to do things a little differently. And I just have this personal belief that trips generally are a spiritual activity, like it almost renews us in some way or brings us back in a more relaxed, open frame of mind back home, you know, where we spend most of our time. And I think that might be why you're having this dream, because I think you might not be fully satisfied with the way that you handled that, the way that you dealt with it when those doubts started to reemerge. And you may be interrogating on this trip, what would be a different way that I could have addressed that? Because your core value is empathy. And in that moment, you may have used a strategy that was not very empathetic toward yourself, instead of really opening your heart to, well, what does this doubt have for me? why was I even experiencing it in the first place? And how do I embrace myself more profoundly? You were like, I just want to change this right now. I don't want that old me to come back. And so I'm not going to allow it any space.
That's making some sense to me. You see, being from Dallas, being in the DFW, so much is in a hurry. And one of the things I've been trying to embrace on this vacation is go slow. Take in the moment, take in the beauty of life. And, that's one of the things y'all pointed out that's different here is people aren't in a hurry. They're not driving 10 or 20 miles over the speed limit. They're driving the speed limit and sometimes below, and nobody's bothered by that. You're behind somebody, you just relax into it. And, it's something that I have experimented with before, just like caught up in traffic and just observing the beautiful sky and just trying to get in a whole new space of that being just a part of my natural being, just a part of me.
Yeah. Becoming that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that this quote unquote wise part of his consciousness represented by me did something good by telling him to wash away the fingerprints on the gun? I don't think so. What do you think?
I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this. What if taking the wrong route still gets you where you need to go?
It will. Well, it will, Michael. It depends on how philosophical we want to be, because one of the difficulties with working with symbolic dreams is you can bring yourself into a state of such objectivity with your dreams that it's like, it's all good. I'm just not going to take any action, because you can see philosophically with repeated interpretation of symbolic dreams, especially when you have the privilege and the honor of working with other people's dreams, we're all on the same path. There is nobody who is just going to crash and burn. That's not going to happen. We all have our moments of intense difficulty. We have our great joys. We have our great sorrows, but we're all getting where we need to go. And dreams tell us that. There's no question.
Yeah.
But right now, it's pretty clear to me that this dream is telling you weren't happy with the way that you handled something. And I think we're on the right track. I think it was a lot to do with what you just said. It had something to do with self-doubt.
And you were trying to hide it.
Yeah, hide it from yourself.
Yes.
And you know what, another thing too, okay, let's get deep here. This is DreamSpeak after all. You're a very intuitive person, very intuitive and very open-hearted, and you can connect with people really easily. I think it's sort of an elephant in the room and it's hard to talk about, but it's okay. Like, I'm okay with it because I trust you. You know that I've been having a bit of a hard time, and emotionally, mentally, and it's not ordinary for me. That's not how I normally am. And you and I haven't gotten to share physical space in quite a while. And so I have the feeling that your heart really goes out to me. And so maybe part of why I appeared in your dream is because, yes, you see me as having all those qualities, but I'm also a part of your consciousness that would rather just be like, everything's fine. Like, we're just going to put this in the past, like it never happened. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because that might be something you'd intuit that I might want to do, because some of the things I'm going through right now are difficult for me. I'm having new challenges mentally, spiritually, and I'm having to search for new tools and learn new ways of being, and the gun is a tool he already had. It's not like a new tool.
Yeah.
Kind of the first obvious thing to just grab and shoot.
Yeah. 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 So that is interesting. The wise part of my consciousness would do something like that that's really illegal. And it's just not the illegality of it, because I know in my own conscious mind that I would trust the police. I would tell them exactly what happened, that I gave it to this person, and tell them who it was instead of trying to hide it.
Exactly. And what I feel there is you have empathy for a part of yourself that you may not have looked at for a while, but that you're looking at because you're here with me, because you have empathy for me, the waking person. And so you can feel it. My heart is very tender. And right now I'm trying to learn to deal with my own self-doubt. Am I going to move on from this phase of my life? Will I be okay? Yes, my soul knows that I will be okay, but it doesn't mean that I'm not scared sometimes. And you know that. You can feel it. And I think part of this dream is probably that you were feeling into a tender place within yourself and recognizing that you have that too. And so it's kind of like this juxtaposition, which is very common in symbolic dreams, because contrasting two things can really help us see a message. And so you got this aspect of you that committed the crime, and then you've got this aspect of you that's trying to cover it up. The one here was kind of violating your personal values out of old bad habits related to self-doubt. But this one here, this is a wise part of you, and you love and you trust this part of yourself, but you know it also has that tender place where it could use a little bit more love and a little bit more understanding. And so, yes, maybe it was willing to cover this up, but you're not going to jump down its throat and be like, why would you do that? You're going to seek to understand, you know? And so I really think the dream is trying to show you that's the approach that your heart says to employ with both of these parts of yourself. This misunderstood part from the past, as well as this part that you presently recognize and embrace. And that's just who you are, you know?
I think you've put it together really well. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. It's making a lot more sense to me right now because, just thinking about that, it reminds me that at a very young age, preteen, I was deeply depressed. I really didn't want to live. There was lots of thoughts I had as a preteen of how could I die without going through too much pain, or just what if I'd never been born?
Yeah.
And so, but it also reminds me though, the concept of, the further you draw the bow back, the further the arrow flies. So being down so low is what allows me to appreciate being up now.
It's beautiful.
It really helps me, Michael. Thank you for saying that. And just so our listeners know, who do include some family members, I have not had any suicidal ideation. That's not an issue I'm dealing with. Thank God. I mean, that's a blessing in life to not be struggling like that. But because I am dealing with some mental health issues really for the first time in my life, I empathize with what you just said. And it helps me tremendously because it shows me here's this human being that Rick and I both love and cherish. And it's very touching and very sad to think of those hard times that you went through. But then you give this beautiful metaphor of look, what all has blossomed over the years from that. And I really believe that that's something that is very possible for me as well. I'm looking forward to that. And I just love that you were wearing that hoodie all day today. I'm sure you know what it says. You know it by heart.
The world is a better place because of the person behind me. And you spent a lot of the time of the hike behind me, looking out for me.
I was right there. It was like you were wearing this incredibly sweet, sentimental hoodie just for me as we're just walking along for a real long time. I'm like, this is great, man. That's what I needed from Michael.
But you know what? It's also true. I mean, I just know enough about you, about your teaching and what you do in life. And you are a person that is truly important to so many people. And I'm imagining people that you don't even know how much you helped. It's people that just passed through, but just something you did, small thing that uplifted them. And you are a real treasure. And you've touched me so many times. And in fact, this interpretation right here is really touching for me.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's a gift. And I'm glad we could discuss it. And just kind of to bring this whole thing in for a landing, I think basically, like I said, you hold yourself to a very high moral standard. And my theory that was why this dream occurred, I think that's proven true. And what I think you're basically trying to tell yourself is you spoke a lot during our conversation about how self-love is the basic philosophical tenet for your coaching practice, the philosophical basis for your spiritual life, and the essence of most of the good things that you attribute to what you've accomplished in life, which I could not agree more. That just fits you to a T. It's a very powerful quality that radiates from you, and it's really nice for us, to share space with you because it makes us feel really good just to be around you. And what I think this dream is saying, like I said, a little tune-up dream, I think it's saying that that you want that ethic, that personal ethic, to be completely consistent in all areas of your life. because you know it's the thing that always yields the best results. And there was just a little roughness in the way that you dealt with yourself. And I think you're just looking back and assessing and saying, I could have handled that with a little more curiosity and been a little bit more open-hearted towards myself. And that would have been me. That's who I am. So the next time something like this happens during a stressful period, I'm going to approach myself differently.
That makes very good sense. And it's also in line with my practice of being kind to myself. And whenever I do mess up, to try to learn from it, but don't beat myself up. Just learn what I can and move on. And to me, moving on is kind of like a death.
That's a great metaphor.
And just to add to it, since my stepmother transitioned, there's been a lot of things happen in my life that I felt I didn't have control over. But during these times, I've tried to make a conscious practice of staying grounded and staying calm and staying kind. And that somehow has worked out really well. I mean, there's been times when it looked like, damn, that's really bad. And whenever I tried to practice this consciously, things turned out better than before. You know, my car breaks down, a shot engine on a 2016 model car. It's going to cost more money to replace the engine, but somehow I'm getting a brand new engine in that car for around $1,000. And so those are some of the things that were happening just as I was leaving before I was leaving Dallas. And so, it just, somebody hit the rental car that I was in. And I just was lucky enough to have somebody that's a good Samaritan that not only witnessed it, but came and reported it to me and had pictures. And so I'm getting the insurance to take care of it. But without the good Samaritan, I think one of the things I'd like to close out is I've developed a belief. I've cultivated this belief that everywhere I go, people love me. And I've come to really believe that. And I've experienced that. I've experienced love, and, I just seem to experience it from strangers every day. And whenever I believe that, whenever I know this, it really relaxes me because I'm not feeling defensive. And it helps me a lot. It helps me to navigate through some things that are really stressful. They're stressful, but I'm able to pull myself back in and remind myself of what the truth is.
Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. And we're really, really glad that you took some time and to do this with us and be on DreamSpeak.
Well, I've followed y'all a long time, and I've listened to so many of your podcasts. And I feel really honored to be invited to this.
Thank you.
We're thrilled. And thanks for sharing, Michael.
Yes.
Great having you here and having you on our podcast.
And one of the people that knows that DreamSpeak was a face-to-face group for years.
From the beginning.
One of our
years
very
ago.
important founding members has now been on the show too.
Well, honestly, it was a life-changing thing for me. It revolutionized my dreaming. I mean, it really revolutionized it and my understanding of what's going on inside.
Yeah. Yeah, we were always fascinated by your dreams, and you showed us some of the different kinds of nighttime dream activities that we didn't even know were possible.
Like your shared dreaming that you would have.
That's true.
That was so interesting.
And it's been about a year since I practiced that, but it can be done.
Yes, and it's amazing. It is incredible. So thank you for helping to enlighten us about shared dreaming. And also, you came once with a fascinating past life dream. And that was another really cool thing, because Rick has had some neat ones too, but yours was unique in my experience, at least, because you realized you were at your own funeral. And then there was a written biography, and you had managed to retain a great deal of that information. It was just like it was written.
I hadn't thought about that in a long time.
It was fascinating. You got a lot of information about that life.
Well, quite honestly, just coming to my first DreamSpeak, I was able to grasp so many things quickly, and it really revolutionized. I mean, I had dreams of being, you went to an Indian
I
yoga studio. I mean, yoga training, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
I
right.
had a dream about being in that place. You remember that? And I named the place. I'd never heard of it.
And you told me I was supposed to help heal somebody?
He dreamed without any prior knowledge was Shivananda. So the guru, the lineage founder of your yoga intensive, essentially his energy or whatever, his soul, visited Michael and said, here's this person who Michael also had never met before, but this wouldn't be a symbolic dream. This is something that actually happens soul to soul. It's like, here's this person. This person is having a real difficulty right now, and you're the one to help. And then Michael was like, yes, but I also just need to recruit Rick into this situation. This is
Yeah.
how I remember it. Do you remember anything more about that dream?
Yeah, because there was this person that was crying because she was told she was not able to give birth. And I told her, I said, you're going to give birth to very big things, very important things. You're destined for, it's not just a birth of a human, but a birth of ideas and concepts and things that people haven't imagined yet.
That's amazing.
You didn't even know the name of the guru.
No, or
Because
the
I had just
school.
gone to the yoga teacher training in the Bahamas for a month. And
Yeah.
But he pulled the name out of the air. He just couldn't
Yeah.
pronounce it quite right.
yeah.
Yeah.
He said it started with an S, Ananda. I can't remember exactly, but it was clear that he was talking about Shivananda, and he was given this healing task, and you helped this person on a soul to soul level. Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember a dream where you came and helped me with something in my dream. You gave me some healing. I remember very specifically that you came and helped me to heal something in a dream.
That is so cool. So you guys had some shared dreaming too, and it was a healing dream as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I've been able to do that with a few other people over the years. I remember a person that had cancer. It was a friend of a friend, and she was not considered to have long to live. So in this dream, I have this saber. It's probably about 8 or 10 inches long. So I carried that into this person's body and found these tendril-like things that were connecting to this cancer. I remember cutting those. And shortly after that, when she went to the doctor, it had shrunk considerably. Quite honestly, she lived another 10 years before she succumbed.
You
So
have
I don't-
amazing healing powers.
I don't
Michael.
know. Well, I don't know. I don't completely understand it, but I have done some things like that.
Yes, it's really a gift. It's really awesome to just be able to kind of learn from that, because it is another aspect of dream life that is possible and it's important. And it's intriguing too, because it's not a symbolic dream, but in the sense that you had this tool, which was the sword, and then you had this way of perceiving what was happening, and you knew, well, if I can destroy these things, that will help heal this person, which was correct.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real interesting contrast between the gun in your symbolic dream and the sword, which was this healing tool in this other dream, because they're both theoretically weapons. Right. But it has so much to do with the fact that both your gun and the sword, they're tools that you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
You have developed these things spiritually. And with the sword, the difference was the intent with which you were wielding it. And it's still this, powerful thing. And, firearm can be a powerful, positive thing in a dream as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, death is generally, in a spiritual sense, not a negative thing.
That's right.
No, it's change.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and in many cases, rebirth.
Mm-hmm. It's usually for the better.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
You can find this podcast on all popular streaming services. Email us a dream today at contact@dreamspeak.us. Check out our YouTube channel for a free introductory dream course. Connect with DreamSpeak for even more learning. Our socials are in the description. Our theme music was composed by me, Rica. This podcast does not constitute medical advice. If you have concerns about your well-being, talk to your doctor or a mental health professional.